Hello and welcome to the latest in the Leaders with Ambition podcast series. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my guest, Vanessa Torres. Vanessa is currently the Chief Marketing Officer at Lowenstein. And this is going to be a fabulous conversation today. Really interesting things we're going to be discussing. Vanessa grew up in Peru, Indiana, and she is Puerto Rican heritage. She was one of only 5 non-white students in her school, which it sounds phenomenal, doesn't it? When you think about the multicultural world that many of us live in today. But she was always curious about people from a young age. And this is going to come out through the podcast today as well. I love the fact that Vanessa decided that she was going to become a lawyer and move to New York after watching the film A Few Good Men. And why not? Why not indeed? and how she started her career as a library assistant and moving very quickly into a paralegal role. And then into marketing when it became apparent for her that the passion that she had didn't necessarily lie in going down into a lawyer route, but definitely in the world of law as well. And she'll talk about the impact of working in the wider professional services market and how when she had her time at BDO and the amazing strategic ability that she learnt there, that she subsequently put into her law firm roles as well. And that's really accelerated her career. And I think some of the firms that she's worked with as well. We'll touch on the transitioning period from managing to leadership. And that's always challenging, as we know. And there's a little bit of imposter syndrome thrown in there along the way, which we'll discuss. And the importance that mentoring has had on Vanessa's career. And in fact, some of the decisions that she's made in her career have been her mentors saying, you can do this. And that's been so powerful that she's paid this forward repeatedly. So lots for us to unpick today. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Vanessa to bring her career history to life for us today.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I was thinking how this is my first podcast that I've ever recorded, and I'm so honored to be able to share my story. I find so much inspiration from learning about other people's career stories, and hopefully I can do the same for someone else. So thank you for having me. I moved to New York City 5 days after a college graduation. I was working in the law library at Indiana University Law School during my work study in undergrad. And I thought, I really just want to live in New York. I didn't have a car. And I joke with people that I moved to New York because I didn't have a car and I didn't need one. But ultimately, I just felt that it was a place for me. Growing up in a really small town and not being exposed to a lot of diversity, it was exciting for me to see New York for the very first time, which is actually an interesting story that I was able to see New York for the first time 5 days after 9/11. And ultimately, yes, so I was in college and one of my roommates was from Long Island and said, I really want to go to my family. And she said, will you drive with me from Bloomington, Indiana to Long Island? And I said, okay. And so my first exposure to seeing and being in this part of the country was just a few days after 9/11, and there was still smoke coming from the towers. And we're driving on what I think right now, because I didn't know where I was, but on the BQE, the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, into around Manhattan and into Long Island. And I could see the smoke, and they were playing the song Hero by Enrique Iglesias on the radio on Z100. And it would be came the anthem of that time. And so it was just a really moving and impactful experience to see that and to see New York City in this time where this community really came together, and to just have that little bit of exposure to this enormous place where there was still a sense of community and compassion was really, really enticing to me. So I came back at Christmas that year and got to go into Manhattan for the first time. And this time we drove again, and she drove us in through the Lincoln Tunnel right into Times Square. And I teared up and I thought, oh my gosh, I love it here. And I just really felt a comfort and a sense of home in New York City immediately. And I knew that this is where I wanted to be. So the next part of the story is, how do I get from point A to point B, and graduating and then deciding, okay, well, what job do I want to do. And I think I want to go to law school eventually. And I'm an English major. As you mentioned, I loved the movie A Few Good Men, and that's what made me decide to go to law school. I thought, I want to scream in a courtroom, you can handle the truth, and so I had thought for years, that I would be a doctor, and I was really bad at math and chemistry and science. The words come to me much easier than the sciences and the math do. So I had shifted into this kind of English literature path in my early college career as an entryway into law school. And then I got the job at the law library. So it kind of fell into place, life was putting me in this direction. But ultimately, my boss at the library came to me one day and just was chatting and said, "What are you doing when you graduate?" And I said, "I really just want to live in New York City. I don't really know what my job will be." And the next time I came to work, she had left a job posting for a law library assistant at what is now DLA Piper. At the time was Piper Rednick. And this was in 2003. So this is I just celebrated 22 years in New York, actually, in May. And
Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. And so I applied for this job and I got an interview and I flew to New York, right somewhere between finals and graduation. And I had this interview. And while I was in New York for the interview, I met a friend of a friend who was living in a women's residence run by nuns on 72nd Street on the Upper East Side. And she said, "Oh, I live in this. It's like a dorm for women, and they're students, or they're, like recent graduates, or some of them are doctors in residence. Some of them are actors and dancers. It's really a nice place and safe place to live." And I thought, oh my gosh, now I think I might find a place to live in a safe area. So my mom will be happy and I may have a job. This is amazing. And so, yeah, 2 weeks later, I think it was around 2 weeks later, I graduated. And 5 days after graduation, I packed up a minivan with everything I owned and I drove to New York City by myself.
I mean, that's unbelievable. Hearing yourself talk back on that, that's a really brave thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah. It's interesting because you kind of go on these adventures in life and then for me, I found myself getting a little complacent. And it's funny, actually, I'm so excited to talk to somebody in the UK because my very first trip to leave the US was to go to London. And I went by myself. And I had a lot of friends saying "Oh, I will come with you on this trip." And I said, "No, that's okay. I need to go by myself. I need to remind myself that I have this ability to be adventurous and to strike out on my own." And I really did turn down a few friends from the trip because I said, "No, this is a big deal to me and I want to do this by myself." So it was to remind myself of that person that I think I was around 27 when I did that. And I wanted to remind myself of that 22-year-old young woman who struck out on her own. And I've since traveled a lot by myself and I love it.
So where did you get your independence from then? Was that something that you found, was your mum very supportive, and
Yes.
were you able to then really think about, I can do this?
I love that question. And yes, my mom is incredible. And she says I came out this way. She's like, "You just came out with a personality and an attitude all your own." But she also nurtured that, right? And she gave me space. And so we mentioned that my family are Puerto Rican and I grew up in Indiana, but I spent a couple of summers where my mom put me on a plane at 8 years old from Indianapolis to Puerto Rico. And I spent the summers with family. Like, my mom wasn't with me. And then I went to summer camp, and I was always kind of willing to get out of the house and see what was out there. And so that's such a good question because she definitely nurtured that part of me.
I love that. There's obviously a strong woman in your life, and I know you do surround yourself with strong women as well, don't you? Which is really good. And also people that, as I mentioned earlier, you do pay it forward, which is fantastic. So you started your job. You're at DLA, which, as we know, is just an amazing firm as well. Did you recognise and did you understand that at the time? Because it was your first foray into the working world in a law firm.
No, not really. And I was 22 and I was in the library and I was learning some research tactics and shelving books. And I was starting to learn my client service skills because the lawyers are asking for research, or they're asking you, "Can you please bring me this volume, or can you update this material?" And so I thought, oh, I need to do a great job. I really want them to like me and I want them to respect me and to value me. And so that was when I started thinking about client service. And that has very much extended into the rest of my path. So no, I did not know I was in this big firm and I didn't understand the caliber of that experience until much later. And while I was at DLA, they had merged a few times to become what it is today. So Piper Rudnick was a little bit more of a regional mid-sized firm, I think, at the time. And really, I can't even remember exactly how many lawyers were there when I joined. But then I left in 2012. It is, I think, what it is today it's even bigger today. But it was an incredible experience. And I made my way into being a paralegal 1 year after being in the firm. I had been doing some research for a couple of tax litigation partners, which is a very niche area. And I had a call from the paralegal manager, and she said, "Would you like to be their paralegal?" And I said, "I don't know what a paralegal does." And she said, "That's okay. You'll figure it out." And I said, "Okay." So maybe that's like, adventure number 2 that I say, I don't know what it is, but I'll go for it and I'll give it a shot. Right. And so I became their paralegal, and we were a small team with the 2 partners and an associate at the time, and grew a little bit over time. And I ended up hiring a junior paralegal and training. That's when I had my first experience interviewing. And I remember the partners saying, you're going to be the first decision maker, and you're going to interview candidates. And when you find one that you really like, you're going to have us meet them. And I said, okay. And I interviewed this one young candidate, and I was young too, but I interviewed this candidate, and in my mind, I was like, she's okay. I wasn't blown away, but I thought, well, I think I need them to meet her. And they met the candidate, and they said, "Why did you have us meet this person? Like they weren't qualified," or, whatever feedback that they had, that they're saying, no, you're making a decision here. Like, is this somebody that you really think can do the job and that you can work with, et cetera? And I said, oh, they were like, "Don't waste our time again." And I said, okay, I won't, so I really learned in that to look out for certain, characteristics when you're interviewing people. And so that was an interesting learning experience. And then to be able to train. And I learned very quickly, I love mentoring and teaching and guiding and really giving people the opportunity to learn and grow and find their own success. And it gives me a lot of joy and fulfillment to be able to do that. And so I learned that very quickly. And I will tell you what's funny is that the first one we hired ends up ultimately in her career becoming a lawyer at DLA. But she only worked with us for about 9 months before she said, "I think I want to try my hand in fashion." And she went, and her father was not happy about this. And she is still a dear friend of mine. And I was at her wedding, and she has 2 beautiful kids. And her husband was in my office at Lowenstein recently for a meeting that he had. And so it's just funny to say, like, it was her first job, and she came in, and she was only with us for that short period. But you really bond in these law firm roles, and the friendships that you can make are very long lasting because it's such a unique experience in a law firm. And when you have that together and you understand, what does it mean to bill your time? And your friends are saying, like, "Why are you working while we're watching The Bachelor?" And you're like, somebody's got to do it, and it's me, right? And so when you find people who kind of get that, that also makes a big difference.
I love that, though, that the first person that you hire, you work with, you have such a big impact on them that you're friends for life. That's fantastic, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
It's really special.
You started to develop your career, and you decided probably mid-period of time there that you didn't want to go into law. You didn't have the passion for it, did you?
It's true.
Was it a surprise to you? Because you're a very focused woman, aren't you? So I can imagine that you've got your sight set on something, you're going for it.
Yeah, it did. It did surprise me. There are a few factors that play into it that also are really fascinating, I think, from really a socioeconomic perspective. And that is that to go to law school costs a lot of money. And right, you have to buy your materials to study. And a lot of people hire tutors, or they take, courses to study. And then you have to take the exam, and the exam is not free. And then you're applying for these schools, and you're spending money on applications. And I was a single 22 to 25-year-old in this period, making a pretty low salary and supporting myself completely. I didn't have the support of my family. They couldn't afford to pay my rent or, give me any extra. So it was all on me. And it became a thought in my mind where I don't know if I'm so excited about being a lawyer that I want to put the money and that I have the money and really to struggle to be able to put myself through that. And then to realize that you get to law school, and I hear this from friends, and you go there and you meet these people who, a lot of them, their parents are lawyers or their uncle or their aunt, and they kind of can call their relative and say like, oh, I'm reading about this case, and what perspective can you give me, dear relative, well, before I go into class tomorrow? And the people who don't have that, and there are a lot of them, but it just, everything is harder. And it's not to say that I was afraid of hard. I've never been afraid of hard, but I want to really want it before I'm going to, because I put my whole self into everything that I do and that I care about. And so it was really a lesson of, I kind of, and I would say like, if I had been able to afford it, or if I had more financial support outside of just my income alone, would I have gone in the path? And I think not. I really loved working in the firm. I loved being around, and still to this day, I love being around smart people who work hard. To have that exposure and then to say, oh, but hold on, there's a whole other world in a law firm. And I will credit my current COO, who was my former COO at my last firm, Mike Kaplan, for really teaching me this, that we are the business of law and the lawyers and the paralegals are the practice of law, right? And so to be able to be part of the business of law that's helping the machine run so that the lawyers can focus on practicing law and serving their clients, then it's such a beautiful harmony to be able to bring that together. And so it's exciting because I found that direction, and I had seen, and I tell the story, I had seen a friend of mine at DLA who was a marketing, and I watched her go from marketing assistant to coordinator to specialist and up, and she's very successful and senior and a dear friend to this day doing events. And I was like, well, I love to throw a party, and that's kind of the first thing. I think a lot of people who go into marketing and business development in professional services in particular, they're not as focused on, at least I wasn't, on what business development really means, which is really relationship building and relationship based and nurturing relationships with your clients and prospective clients and your contacts and finding out how can I help you. And that part really drives me. But in the beginning, it was, oh, wait, I want to throw a party, or I want to go to that conference that's in Las Vegas, or whatever the thing is. So it's interesting, like how you kind of start to think of or look at your path, and then you see like really what the direction that it really ultimately took.
Yeah. And when you were going through that at the time, when you were looking at your friend who was going through the marketing and getting the promotions as well, did you feel excited about it? Was that when you were looking at that thinking, this looks right up my street, this is something that I could do?
Yeah. And I think what I really look at is actually the relationship between the paralegal and the partner its own dynamic. Associate to partner, partner to partner. And then I'm seeing a different type of relationship being formed between the marketing and the business development person and the partners. And when you drill into it, right, if you're a timekeeper, you're working together to serve a client's needs. And there's also the dynamics of somebody wants to make partner, or they want elevation, and there's a whole other thing, right? For marketing and business development, and I would say on the BD side even more so, your dynamic is that we're collaborating together to grow your book of business, to grow and nurture the relationships that you're building. I need to show you the value that I can bring to you for you to be able to, again, practice law, and I'll focus on the business of law so you can focus on the practice of law, so that we're getting you the client in the door. So you're over here being a lawyer, and I'm arming you with the tools to make it as painless as possible, because I was going to say easy. It's never easy.
Never easy.
Right? Yeah. But as painless as possible to actually build, nurture, and develop those relationships.
So when did you recognize for you then that this was going to be a career? Because when did it go from being a job to a career, when you're thinking, right, okay, as you just said there, you threw yourself into something?
Yeah.
Well, 100%.
It was right away. So I decided to make the move, and I started looking, and I tell the story of meeting with a couple of recruiters, and one in particular saying, this is going to be really hard to place you. Your background isn't great for marketing and BD. You're just a paralegal. And I thought,
Yes.
somebody's missing the mark here. And then as that feedback, while it was really frustrating, and I may still hold a little grudge about that, but ultimately it did help me to realize that I really needed to articulate my value add, right? And what is my value proposition as someone coming into this type of work, and to say, I have navigated a complex organization. I have navigated challenging or different or unique personalities. I understand the need to serve the client and to be efficient. I understand that every minute counts. And so again, when I keep going back to let the lawyer practice law, the less billable time that they have to, put on the non-billable stuff, the better. And if I can help that be the case, then everybody's winning. So once I got my first role as a marketing specialist, I was hired by someone who had been a paralegal, and she was like, "Oh, this is a no-brainer," right?
Yeah.
And so when I first started in that role, I was immediately happy. I thought, this is fun. This is interesting. I was doing research. I remember a partner was going to a small dinner party, and they'd asked me to do research on each of the attendees. And, I found a few pieces of information that were helpful to say, maybe you don't want to mention X, or, you should focus on Y. This person just ran a marathon, or whatever it
Yeah.
was. And to say, like, talk to them about that. And so to be able to identify ways that people can connect with each other, and then you add that to everything that we do, right? From marketing and communications, how are we messaging? How are we engaging with our audience, whether it's by client alerts or newsletters or social media? And then you drill down into the business development side, and you're really thinking about, how can I make the most impact to this person's life? Again, how can I help you? How can I serve you? And how can I anticipate the needs that you may have? And for me to do that from the BD side, and to then share those insights with the lawyer who gets to do that then to their client or their prospective client, it just is it's very exciting and fulfilling.
I love the practice of law to the business of law as well. I think that really resonates, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The job is to make sure that the attorneys have the ability to do their jobs effectively. So that's a really good way of looking at it. So your COO speaks lots of sense, obviously.
He does.
And
He
so
does.
you decided to go to BDO. So you went into the wider professional services market. What
Yes.
was the reason behind that for you?
I took
Because you
the
said it
time
came
out.
to you strategically, didn't
I
it?
did. Well, part of it, in full disclosure, I had spent now, I don't know, at the time, 12 years in law firms or something. I may be off on the timing, but I'd spent my whole career to that point in law firms, and I got a little burnt out. I know that it's a grind. And I remember at the firm I had been at, we logged our time, and I was logging something like 2,200 hours a year. Like that's what associates are expected to bill to be bonus eligible or something. So I was like, oh, I'm working really, really hard. I will say I learned so much in that experience. I try to really look at every experience as a learning opportunity, even when it's hard or challenging. And so I learned really, I can't remember. It was like 1 year where just me alone, I had ground out 100+ pitch decks, and I had worked on so many chamber submissions and thrown a few events that were pretty big. And, it was kind of like, oh, this is just nonstop. And I wondered, what would another experience be like outside of
Yeah.
a law firm? And I had this opportunity come up to go to BDO and to work in their consulting or advisory function as a marketing lead for, at the time, it was cybersecurity and data privacy.
So interesting topic as
It
well
was
then.
also, yeah, it was really interesting. And that was really great because that practice there was pretty nascent. And so I had to also put my paws in a little bit into practice management. And I really liked the correlation, or kind of the parallels of practice management and business development, and really understanding staffing needs and revenue targets and the budget for the practice and hiring and integrating new partners and that piece of it. And then thinking of now, how do we market? We're building this practice, and now how do we get to market it? And
Yeah.
I will always say, and maybe my law firm friends won't like to hear this, but I do think that the professional services, the accounting firms and consulting firms are at least 5 years ahead of the law firms when it comes to marketing trends and strategies. And so I was really surprised by things that were today we would all say, oh, duh, of course you were like, of course that's what you should do, right? Like a social media share. Now, this is before some of these tools that make it very easy for us to do. But I got there and they were sending an email to the practice group saying, so and so wrote an article. Please share it on your LinkedIn. Here's share language that you can copy and paste. And I thought, whoa, this is genius, right? And so to like kind of, that's like one example, which I will tell you after about almost 3 years at BDO, when I ended up back in the law firm and had Goodwin, I took that there.
Yeah.
And to this day, they still send an engage with your network email, right? Because it is a good way to get people to understand what thought leadership we're putting out and to promote it. But so that's something that I learned there very quickly. But what I really loved about my time in that experience was that different than a lot of lawyers, and it's evolving, always evolving, but that the partners and the subject matter experts for the practice looked at me and said, you're the marketing expert. What should we do? And they really wanted my inputs. And that's where a lot of that imposter syndrome started to come in, because I'm like, no, they are
I need
asking
to know
me.
everything.
Yeah. And like, I don't know if I know. Right. And so what I loved about that experience is twofold. One, I really had a seat at the table there, and I was sitting with very senior leaders in the firm of the different practices that I worked with and supported, promoting new practices and building and promoting. And that was really, really fulfilling, not just for my ego to say, oh, I had a seat at the table, but because I was learning so much every day about business and
Yeah.
how do you approach these business needs, and how do you think about, again, client service. This was around the time where the phrase client centric became very popular in our world, right? And I learned at BDO, when I'm putting a pitch deck together, we don't start with about our firm. We start with our understanding of you, the client, and our understanding of your needs or this opportunity, right? And then you drill, and here's our relevant experience. And then way back at the back of the deck, you could put like about the firm. And we have 7,000 offices and 1,000 people, and we're so amazing and great. And we've won all of these awards. And I say that with a little flippancy, because I say this to partners and they don't always like it. I say it to lawyers generally. And I say, you all are really smart. And you all pass the tests, and you all have the degrees, and you all have these incredible experiences and credentials. So at the end of the day, it's about the relationship that you have built with the person on the other side. And if they want to spend time working with you, right? And so I laugh at that, because that's such it's a common sense, not common practice. Like, of course, people want to relate first,
Yeah.
but we oftentimes go in with, let me tell you about me and everything that I can do for you and all of my amazing credentials. And so just shifting,
Yeah.
and shifting that mindset. So those are some really big pieces that I picked up in my time at BDO. And you had asked too a little bit about the imposter syndrome piece.
Yeah.
I would say I was thinking about it this morning as I was preparing to speak with you. And I was thinking how I got over it in time, in that, one, you find some success and you say, oh, I tried this thing and it worked, right?
Yeah.
Now let me replicate it. But really, it became about being vulnerable, and it becomes about being able to say, I'm not really sure. And I want to think about that more. I want to dig into this more. Can I, to you, partner, who's wanting to have this conversation with me and who is entrusting me with and giving me credibility, that I want to be able to, can we have a dialogue before I just make something up and say, like, let's try this? And that has served me so well in building relationships to say, I don't know. And I want to know, and I want to be curious, and I want to understand where you're coming from and what the end objective really is. And then together we can find the way. And that also has required many, many times of me suggesting something and somebody saying, no, that's not going to work. But thank you for trying. Thank you for thinking about it. And I really urge anyone that I'm working with or, peers and colleagues in other firms, when we have these types of conversations, to use your voice and to be and find empowerment. And if you're not in a space that gives you empowerment, then find one that does.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right? Because it's so important to be able to use your voice and to make those suggestions and to not be afraid of looking stupid or feeling dumb. Because at the end of the day, people really value that you're thinking about them and trying, even if it's not the best approach. And then you get there together.
Yeah. And as you say, when you're at BDO, the partners were saying to you, you're the subject matter expert. So, actually some of the ideas, suggestions you're coming up with aren't necessarily always going to be right, but at least they are different to what
Yeah.
the partner may have experienced before,
Yes.
coming from your area of specialism. Quite fascinating for me, Vanessa, is when you were in that role, did you then start to think, actually, you were learning so much, as you were saying, learning every day, trying things differently, relearning. Did you then think, I'm going to go all the way now? Did you have the CMO title? Was it in your sight and you thought, this is what I need to do to achieve it?
Yeah, it was in my sight very early. Like pretty much that first one, I thought, okay, this is the path, right? This is where I want to go. I really love what I do. And to this day, I absolutely love what I do. And I feel really lucky for that. But I knew from that first marketing specialist job that this was the direction and this was the path for me. And I am very excited that I found myself where I am today.
That's fantastic, isn't it? And I think your passion really shines through. And I know that also we'll go on to talk about leadership in a little while, but I do know that you are very much an effective leader. And I know that your teams feel they've got a really safe psychological space to be their true, authentic selves and to come up with ideas and not worry that it might not be the right idea, which is quite hard to do that. So you've got a skill.
Yeah, thank you.
So you're learning at BDO, you're obviously getting a lot of strategic development there as well. You decide you're going to go back into law. What was the reason behind that?
I really, really debated and I thought, I don't know, but there were changes happening in my world at BDO and I was thinking like, maybe it's time to try something else. I will say, after 9 years at DLA, and that was my first job and I spent 9 years there, I was really looking for my next work home. And I ended up bouncing a little bit, right? Like I had like 2 to 3 year stints at the next few places and I didn't feel great about that. But then it's very normal that people do that. But I was so used to like, oh, well, I'm just here. I was in the first place for 9 years. So it looks really bad that I've moved after 2 or 3 years in these other places. But I do think that that's something really important to share quickly, is that when you spend so much time in your place of work, and it is work, it is not a family, it is a community, but it is not your family, right? But it is the place you go to do a job and get paid. You want to feel happy.
Spend more time there than you would do with your friendship groups or your family groups, don't you?
Absolutely. I do to this day. I spend most of my time is working, right? And the other percent is working out. And then I get to see my friends. So I think that something that I learned, as much as I value my experiences at all of the places that I've worked, there have been times in my career where I thought I shouldn't have stayed there for as long as I did, or I should have made a move sooner because it wasn't the best place for me for whatever the reason was at that time. And so I think it's really important for people to not feel stuck and to really think about, where will I be able to thrive and grow and learn or meet the goal that you have, right? And for everybody, that's different, right? There are times in your life where maybe you're a new parent and you have found a place that lets you have a little bit of a better work-life balance and you've built credibility there. And so it makes sense for you to stay in that situation, right? But maybe you're looking for other opportunities that you're not going to get in your current firm or workplace. And so it's important to make sure that you're always keeping an eye out for what's out there. And so in this case, I had been keeping an eye out, and I had a friend who was actually the marketing assistant turned specialist at DLA from 22 years ago, was at Goodwin. And she said, there's a role here and I think that you would be really great for it. Maybe you should meet with the hiring manager. And so I agreed to meet over a coffee very casually, not like a formal interview. And the night before, I emailed her and I said, I'm really hesitant to come back to a law firm. and I don't want to waste your time. And I kind of tried to get out of the meeting.
Oh
And
my
she
gosh.
said, well, it's really,
Never.
I know it's so crazy. And so she said, well, it's really, I don't mind. Like, it's really nice to grow our networks in this space. And why don't we meet anyway? She did the right thing. And I wasn't thinking right. And I said, okay, that sounds great. So I met her the next morning for a coffee. And the first question she asked was, why are you hesitant to come back to a law firm? And I said, because where I am today, I have a seat at the table and I'm respected in a different way than I have traditionally felt in my previous law firm roles. And these are not knocks on the previous firms. It's just the way that this function operates and historically has operated, right? She said, I totally get that. And I agree with you. Most firms, it is very much, I think I said, I don't want to be the marketing girl who they say, make my pitch deck look pretty.
Yeah.
Right? I can make a beautiful pitch deck, by the way.
I'm sure you can.
Right?
Yeah.
But I didn't want that to be all I was bringing and all that they wanted me to bring. And so, she said, I agree with you. That's very much how it is in a lot of firms. This firm is not like that. And we had a really great conversation and I went through the interview process, and I love to tell the story of meeting with the practice group leader of the group I would be supporting primarily. And halfway through the interview, I don't know if I was just so comfortable or confident because, he was a harder interviewer. He wasn't like warm and fuzzy or anything. We weren't laughing and joking, and which I try to do in interviews if I can swing it that way. Right? But he was giving me a serious interview. But for some reason, partway through the interview, I was comfortable enough or maybe arrogant enough to say, sometimes I'm going to need to tell you no. And he said, that's great. I need somebody who can tell me no. I found it. This is the next stop, right? Because I wanted to be able to have that type of dynamic as we talked about the different types of dynamics. And so I went there and it was an incredible experience. And I was there for 7 years. And in that time, I went from manager to managing director. And I went from supporting one practice area to overseeing the whole of the litigation department's client development team. And I worked on some incredible projects, and I grew immensely in just my skill set and what we do as business development and marketing professionals, and also as a leader and a mentor. And it was an incredible experience.
So well deserved. I know you'll have worked incredibly hard to have achieved that as well, and it's amazing. You just talked about leadership there. So when did you start? Was it there that you started to transition from managing teams to leading teams? And could you really feel it, or was it just experience and more situations and iterations that were happening?
So I had the benefit of having one of the most incredible direct reports that anyone could ever ask for. And I will send her this so she can hear me say that. But so what I was able to do with her, because there weren't the personnel challenges that tend to arise, we were really able to grow together and to also experience, which is really common in what we do. There's a shift from when you're, managing the day to day for a practice group, and you may have some support that works with you to meet those needs. But then as I started to get more responsibility and she started to grow and be able to work more autonomously, we both moved in parallel up the ladder together in a way that I think I feel really fortunate for being able to trust her to manage the day to day, but also to know when to come to me and say, hey, something's not going right. I need your guidance. I need your help. And so that kind of goes back to something that you said earlier, that I really try to foster an open dialogue with everyone that I work with, not just my direct reports, but everyone on the team and everyone across the firm, because people should feel, again, they should be able to use their voice and they should be able to be vulnerable and say, I don't know and I need help. And there are leaders that we've all had that don't make you feel comfortable to do that. And it's a ding if you go and you say like, I can't do this, or my plate is too full, or how do you want me to prioritize? Some leaders look at that as a flaw. I look at it as a strength to be able to say, hey, I need help. Can you help me figure this out? Yeah.
But I also think it's interesting, Vanessa, as well, that, you do really create this environment, don't you, of belonging and allyship. And that connects back to when you were younger and you were looking for those connections as well. So you've
Yes.
actually been able to bring it into your work-based life, which is why you are such a great leader and why you are able to get people on this journey with you. Because sometimes it is a journey when you've got a piece of work to do, isn't it?
It
You've got
really
to get
is.
people
And
tied in.
I appreciate you raising that because, I feel like I've spent my career really having to go above and beyond to prove something, to prove that I belong here, to prove that I'm worthy. And it's really, so I'll get a little emotional. It's
Yeah.
really, but it's really special because I grew up in this place where, as you said, there were 5 out of 165 kids in my graduating class who were not white. And that is representative of the community that I grew up in. And I had to really find a way to connect with people who were very different from me just at our core, right? And to have that experience, some could say, wow, that's really unfortunate that that's how you grew up. I always look for that silver lining, and it just made me somebody who really looks for every way to connect, to find a common ground with someone, and to really feel like I'm sharing about myself and that they will reciprocate that.
Yeah.
And that's how we build a relationship, right? And then that has led into, again, like, it doesn't end, and here I made it, right? Like I got the title and the job that I have been striving for, but it doesn't end. I start over here, and I'm now having to build my credibility here in this firm with a whole new set of lawyers and colleagues. And and this is forever, right? And I don't know if everybody feels that, they're working that hard to prove themselves along the way as much as I feel like I am. And I think some people probably have that more than others, but it definitely, I think, also helps the people around me to find me relatable.
Yeah.
Because I am very honest and too open. And I say, like, this is how I really feel about this. And, and I really endeavor to, again, find the ways to connect. And I think that really sharing and being vulnerable and being curious about the other person, as those are my catchphrases that you're hearing today, but those really help you to build those relationships. And so when you are leading, and not just your own team and your own department, because now also I am learning that I am walking the hall and there are a lot of people who know who I am, and I don't know who everyone is yet. I'm still new. And they're saying, that's the new chief marketing and BD
Yeah.
officer. That's
You're,
Vanessa.
you're a role model. You're a
Yes.
C-suite and
And
you're a role model, which I think is
I take that very seriously. And I think that that's something that I also learned that, and I don't recall that something negative necessarily happened, but I recall a time at Goodwin partway through where I realized people are hearing everything that I say, and I could be impacting someone with any statement that I make. And our words really matter, and the way that we carry ourselves at work matters, and the attitudes that we portray matter. And I have to really be cognizant of that somebody could pick up on something that I say and maybe take it the wrong way, or take it in a way that might make them behave in a way that is not so positive, because I saw Vanessa do that, or Vanessa said this thing. And it really is something that started to sink into me. And I have to remind myself that a lot, because like I said, I'm very honest, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Why, like in my mind, I'm like, why are we doing it that way? And then I have to say, you can't say that out loud.
But I think it's been authentic, isn't it? It's authentic
Yes.
to you. That doesn't mean it's the way someone else should say it, because it's not authentic to them. And I think that's what people have to really drill down into their own selves a lot of the time. You're obviously, as you just say there, you're very happy in your firm. It's amazing that you've got your CMO role. You've worked incredibly hard to that. How are you paying it forward? What mentoring are you doing and coaching with teams? Because that is at the center of how you operate, isn't it? Is to
Yes.
pay this forward.
I am so excited to be at Lowenstein during this time in particular, because we are on a strategic growth path, and the firm is really working together to grow the firm by revenue, obviously, and also by partner headcount. And all of that means a lot has to happen, right? And that really, we think of it as culture and growth and clients. Those are our 3 kind of buckets of what our strategic plan really is. And so my team has to work. There are a lot of work streams that are going on to help the firm move in the direction that we're trying to go. And I share that because I benefit from coming from a larger firm that was doing things a little bit differently and in some senses more advanced. And so I get to come here and I get to say, hey, let's try this thing, right? And what I love to do is give people the opportunity to try the thing. And
Right.
so we have a lot of initiatives underway, and we're enhancing the way that we're working on certain projects that we've always done, finding efficiencies, finding more collaborative ways to work together. And so for me, to answer your question truly, is to say I am giving people the opportunity to step up into these types of projects that are a little bit outside of the day-to-day managing of their practice areas, and to really work with me and work with other leaders in the firm and get exposure to more partners than maybe they've been a little bit insulated in the past. Or, sometimes some leaders are very quick to make the presentation that their team really did the
Yeah.
work. And then they go to the big group and they're like, and this is what our team did. And I said, I don't need to be the one talking all the
Yeah.
time.
You give
So
recognition, don't you, as well? I
yes,
think
exactly,
really
exactly.
important. Yeah, love that. That's great, isn't it? And I know you're really invested in that as well. And as I say, it shines through, which is fantastic. So, what would you say are the biggest challenges facing CMOs in law firms at the moment?
I think that we're at such a critical time where there is a cohort of partners who really value what this function can bring. And there's the cohort that doesn't value it as much, or
Yeah,
maybe not at all. And so I think where I find it's so important that we are constantly adding value and showing why we're here, because otherwise you can be looked at as a cost center, and we don't want to be looked at as a cost center. We want to be looked at as a strategic
value add.
partner,
Yeah.
right? And that we're partnering together to help you meet your goals and build your practice, and ultimately the firm thrives. And so that all comes from using your voice and using data and data points to tell your story and to explain why are we recommending that we not host that event in 2 days, that the webinar will not have the attendees that you think it will, right? Because history shows that you're going to have a poor turnout if you don't give people enough time, or whatever the data points are, to be able to back up what your recommendations are. And I've said this to everyone that I've worked with for years and years. I say, I sleep well at night because I did my best, and my best is making the recommendation. And at the end of the day, if the partner says, I'm not doing it the way that you're suggesting that I do it, and sometimes it's not that nice sounding, and I just say, okay, well, I've made the recommendation and it's up to you how you want to proceed, and I will support you, right? But you have to make the recommendation because that builds the credibility. So I think for people in my role, as firms are shifting with AI, as clients are very price sensitive and very focused on what is the right AFA that we can put into place. How can I save money with AI? How are
Yeah.
you being more efficient as my lawyers? Then the hours spent on the matter will not skyrocket. You have all of these tools and resources. Why did it take that long? So we have to look at this with recruiting. We're looking at hours. We're looking at attrition. We're looking at all of these factors that are beyond the scope of what you say marketing and BD is.
Yeah,
But
traditionally.
but
Yeah.
it all impacts how we operate, right? And so I think that it's really important that chief marketing and BD officers understand that you have to really get the lay of the land across the entire firm. And it's not just about the website or the social media account, right? There is so much more to it. And then once you understand all of those pieces, and this is where, again, I will give a shout out to Mr. Mike Kaplan, because he really does embody that and really does everything he can to empower in our firm, the Business Solutions Group, to really thrive and to understand and be curious and understand what your partner's goals are and what the practice's goals are, so that together we can, again, what did I say? Let them practice law while we
Yeah.
focus on the business of law.
Which is fabulous to think about, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
So what words of wisdom would you give then to maybe Vanessa when she started her career as a paralegal, thinking that she was going to be a lawyer, to the CMO that you are today?
I think ultimately to be open-minded, because your path can take you in a lot of directions. And if you're so tunnel visioned on that one, that one path, and it's the only way to get somewhere, it's not, right? And there are many ways to get to the end destination, and to be open and to be, as I've now said many times, curious be vulnerable. And I think those are the main pieces that I would want to remind myself. And don't forget to take an adventure once in a while.
Yeah, keep doing those adventures.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, it's been such a pleasure talking to you today. There's so many highlights and takeaways. I think Be Curious definitely is at the forefront of you, as well as having passion for what you do and making sure you find the right place for you as well. There's lots of different firms and you've got to make sure that it's where you want to be. And
that's right.
You can be authentic, you can have your voice heard, and you can give a platform for other people to be heard as well. So I think that's really resonated from the conversation with you today. So thank you so much, Vanessa. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.